I'm Amy and I'm one of the new neonatal voices for Lincolnshire, which is really exciting. It's just got going, so we're just starting to plan what we're going to do. This little loud noise bag is Thea, who was born prematurely at 32 weeks. My story began at 31 weeks when my waters broke while I was at work. Drove myself up to hospital, not really realising what I'd done. I thought I'd actually wet myself. And even declined help from the advanced paramedic who was sitting on the table next to me. So I took myself to hospital. Couldn't park anywhere near the maternity ward, so I actually had to walk probably 2 miles from my car across to the maternity assessment unit, dripping all the way, needless to say, so I'm really sorry for the cleaner. And then was assessed, and they realised obviously my water broke, but I wasn't in labour. At 31 weeks, they didn't have a bed for Thea, so they tried to transfer us out to one of the other hospitals. I'd been in hospital since 10 o'clock that morning, but because they couldn't find a midwife, it wasn't till about 3 or 4 o'clock the next morning, middle of the night, that we were taken over out of county to another hospital. So it was quite a tense time for both myself and the staff on the ward, hoping that nothing was going to happen. Partly because also Thea was transverse breech, so they knew as soon as any sort of labour signs happened that I would need a caesarean section. Sat in another hospital for a week, nothing happening. So by the time it came to Friday, that hospital were keen to get me back into the county and discharged me that weekend, saying my local hospital would be in touch that following week to get me in for more tests. But it didn't make that. I started with contractions early one morning and was admitted to hospital, where through quite a bit of and ahhing, actually ended up being a category 1 emergency caesarean 40 hours later, partly due to short staffing and the monitors not knowing whether I was in labour or not. And then that was it. I was then sent to the maternity ward, and Thea was sent onto the neonatal ward. Oh dear. As you can, and that's where I kind of had a lot of fun. There wasn't really much join up between the maternity ward and the neonatal ward, which I know through neonatal voices, those changes have started to happen. So for one example was, I was very battered and bruised. I had quite a lazy leg from the epidural and couldn't walk very far, and it was quite a long walk to get from the maternity ward up to the several floors above to the neonatal ward. I was reliant on staff or my husband coming in or family coming in, but the visiting hours didn't tally with the neonatal visiting hours. And then as soon as they got onto the neonatal ward, I'd had to pop down for drug rounds and food, which was really inconvenient because you couldn't do the kangaroo care, because by the time you got up there, you thought, oh, I've got to disappear in an hour to go and get my paracetamol and my lunch. So you didn't really have much time for. I know through better births and neonatal voice, that's now changed, so maternity services are delivered on the neonatal ward, which is going to make such a difference and means that you can be with your baby a lot longer. So I've stood up because he's a little bit hungry, which reminds me of breastfeeding. Obviously on the neonatal ward they promote breastfeeding and getting expressing your milk really as soon as possible into helping your baby grow. On the maternity ward, because they're so short staffed, there's no one there to show me how to express milk, or a pump was wheeled in and I was shown that's the plug and that's the on button, but nothing else. And I kept asking, and they kept saying, no, they're coming back, someone will come back and show you. 3 days later I was discharged and still hadn't been shown. So I was so lucky, actually. A neonatal nurse took time to take me to one side and talk me through it, and it wasn't too late to start expressing and then start breastfeeding Thea. And then the next thing, on obviously the neonatal unit, you're in a little bubble, really. There's all these lovely people looking after you and looking after your baby and making sure what you're doing is safe, teaching you how to look after a premature baby. And then you're discharged. And I was discharged on a Friday night, so I was discharged at a weekend. There's nothing, and it's a bit daunting. And we were told a health visitor would be in touch as soon as possible, and there wasn't. So we had to change the health visitor, who came in absolutely lovely, but was very, and admitted to me, she was very underconfident in dealing with premature babies. Her sort of go-to phrase was, well, this is what happens, but it's different for premature babies, so I'm not sure what to do. I know again through Neonatal Voices, and that's now changed. There is going to be a dedicated health visitor with neonatal experience to help mums like that. And now I'm obviously one of 5 new neonatal voices in Lincolnshire, and it's really exciting because what we're doing is trying to link into the LMS. We're also trying to set up more peer support for families and their little premature and medically vulnerable children, bringing them together in safe environments so they can get that peer support and be signposted to all vital services that you don't get to hear about because you've missed your antenatal classes or you're in that neonatal bubble.
Hello, I'm Alison. This is baby Sophia. I also have another baby, Naomi, who was born at 28 weeks in 2014, and Sophia was born at 31 weeks last year. I also have a son who's 6, who was born full term. My middle daughter was born in 2014, and at 28 weeks, very suddenly, category 1 C-section. She was born at a level 1 unit, a special care baby unit, and it was then transferred to a level 2 unit, to a local neonatal unit 60 miles away. We had our son as well, who was less than 2 years old. I was separated from my daughter for the first 3 days of her life, which is the worst experience ever. It's like having your heart ripped out and thrown repeatedly against the wall. When you're at this distance, on rural roads, if you've had a C-section, you are dependent on other people. You're not fit enough for public transport. And where we live in Lincolnshire, the public transport is virtually non-existent. It's very difficult. And if you're not fit after a C-section, you can't use it. So the impact of separation is terrible for the families, and you make do as best you can. Families get into debt, and babies are not visited. When you're a mum on the unit, you can see this. You see the babies who are not visited day after day, and it's often because the parents can't get there. So I think it's important that we understand why babies are not getting visited. We understand all the details why, and try and support families to be together as much as possible. Sophia was born last year. She eventually came at 31 weeks. Because she was my second premature baby, it was a known risk this time. I'd had a stitch at 21 weeks, and she held on. She started coming at 30 weeks, and I had exactly the same symptoms as when my middle daughter came at 28 weeks, so I was at the hospital within 15-20 minutes. The ambulance came straight away, and this time it was different. I had the first steroids. I had a new treatment, which was magnesium sulfate, which everyone sprang to attention immediately, midwives, doctors, to get on with this. They'd been obviously well trained in what to do with this treatment. The feeling of it, if any of you doctors are watching this, then the feeling of it when it goes in, your body flushes all over and it can feel like your waters are breaking. So that was a bit of almost a comedy moment at that point when I was screaming that my waters were breaking, and they weren't actually. But that was to protect her brain, and then that continued as it should do over a couple of days, with everyone, midwives and doctors, paying attention to that. She had second dose of steroids as well, all in the optimum time frame. So that side of things was very different from the emergency situation the first time I had a premature baby, where I was more or less straight into a category 1 C-section with no preparation. This time also the nurses from the unit, a nurse from the unit came down and told me what to expect, except for I already knew most of it because it was the second time. But I appreciated that. They asked preferences, they asked consent. A doctor came as well from the neonatal unit, so I knew what to expect. I think mentally this time it was a lot better. The separation was unavoidable last time. I was grateful that she was born safe, and she had to be transferred because she needed intensive care. She was actually ventilated and on CPAP for at least a week. She needed TPN, my middle daughter, so she needed to be in a higher level unit. Sophia was able to stay at our local hospital, so mentally and financially and practically the impact was far less this time on me. I also knew the support groups out there, and now in Lincolnshire our neonatal support groups, we're having coffee mornings on the unit, so that families can get used to what's going to be out there for them to support them afterwards. We're linking with health visitors, we're linking with perinatal mental health practitioners. What was interesting with Sophia, having had a second premature baby, was Steps to Change in Lincolnshire. I used the Steps to Change service to help me prepare during the early stages of the pregnancy with Sophia, because obviously there can be a lot of anxiety when you have a pregnancy again after a premature baby. So the midwives were great at signposting me towards that. I think things are on the up for us in Lincolnshire through Neonatal Voices. Sophia is breastfed. This time breastfeeding was a lot easier. Not only was she a little bit more well as a baby, but I was able to visit her and stay with her regularly, because we were in our home unit, local special care unit all the time. So I was able to go into the unit enough to establish breastfeeding with her. And also I think that because the mental impact was less, I was able to establish that bond with her a lot better as well. I was dependent on friends and family for lifts. The taxi just to go a few miles was £15, so I couldn't keep having taxis, and I couldn't drive after a C-section. So being close to your support network is really important, and when it's unavoidable, when you need that higher level care, I think it's important for everybody involved in this to make sure that as much support as possible is there, and that parents know about it, because sometimes the support is there but parents don't know about it. It can be a very chaotic time in their lives, so it's important that they have very clear information. And I think the support when they come back, I mean, a lot of our babies in Lincolnshire, because where we are, we're rural, we haven't got a tertiary unit, we are transferred quite a long way away, and making sure that families know about the support when they come back into the county is very important. And one of our projects in Better Burst Lincolnshire in Neonatal Voices is the knitted stalks, which are going to carry the details of all the local support organisations and the parent groups, so that when the baby transfers, they actually take that with them, so their parents know when they come back to Lincolnshire that support is there for them.
Hi, thank you for listening to our stories. We're really sorry we can't be there in person.
I hope you found it useful, and thank you for giving us this opportunity. Bye.
Bye. Bye.